We are going to start the podcast again. All right. But I know I usually do it with two co-hosts, so it's going to be kind of hard to do this by myself. But until we start up again, I'm going to kind of do little episodes to kind of get myself going again. And then we'll be back in full swing. So I planned out this episode and it's a good one. And I'm going to plan out more. So, and this is unlisted just for you guys. I'm going to put it out on podcasts, obviously. So if you're listening to podcasts, thanks for listening. I found this story really interesting, and I don't think a lot of people have talked about it, but we're going to do it. And we're going to Copenhagen in 1920. In 1920, in Copenhagen was war torn. This is after the First World War, intense poverty, war ravished and torn. The economy was terrible. This was a sweltering summer, July 1920. This was in Vesterbro in Copenhagen. An upstairs apartment 3, there was a lady, and this lady, her name was Caroline Agustin. She's 22 years old. She's a domestic servant, like a lot of the women at that point, domestic servants. She is tattered and torn. Her hands are calloused. She's been working all day for little money. They used krones back then. I'm sure Nicole has been to Denmark, so maybe they had krones. Maybe she's seen a krone. It's basically a dollar, but it says krone on it. She worked for no money at all, little bits of money. She's in raggedy clothes, just like every other female, every other woman in war-torn Denmark in 1920. Anyway, she finds herself in July walking up these apartment stairs, this old apartment. The wood is creaking and cracking, and she can smell something as bittersweet from the apartment. She's actually responding to an advertisement that she's seen in a local paper. She was desperate. She's in desperate need of someone to take her problem away from her, and that problem is her newborn baby. She's 22 years old. In her arms, she is swaddling infant Gerda, 2-month-old. Now, Gerda's father, the one who got Caroline pregnant. Now, I know this is not how it is today. I know this might surprise you guys, so try to really understand this, but the man of the house that she's working for got her pregnant. Obviously, the wife doesn't know. But what I'm saying is, unlike today, where it's definitely not like this, a man got her pregnant and then wanted nothing to do with the baby. I know that sounds strange to you guys, but he basically said, get rid of the baby or you're fired. Now, this is her employer. This is the husband who hires her, or actually the wife hired her to clean the house and other homes too. Obviously, the wife doesn't know about 2-month-old Gerda, and Caroline could barely feed herself. She is making 3,000 krones a year, which is nothing. I mean, this is below minimum wage in today's standards. We're talking about $2 a day or $2 an hour. You know, if minimum wage right now is $15.45 or whatever minimum wage is now, we're talking about she's making $1 an hour or $1.50 an hour, basically nothing. Like everyone else, she is broke. She can't even feed herself, much less 2-month-old Gerda. The man who got her pregnant wanted nothing to do with it and told her to get rid of it. So she responded to this ad that she was looking through the paper, desperate for a solution, and she responded to an ad, and she finds herself at the door of this apartment of this lady named Dagmar Overbye. Haggard old lady, callous looking, 40s, you know, she's been through hell. You can tell she's got that old grandmother. She's got gray hair, even though she's, late 30s. She's just been through it all, answers the door, and she says, that'd be 3,000 kroner. You can give me your baby. So here's what the ad said. If you have a baby that you don't want, or you have a son or daughter you don't want, you can sell it to this lady, Dagmar, and she will adopt it out to a family who does want it. And that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing. Now, this this story is the reason why in Denmark, at least, every newborn baby is registered. Like over here, we have social security numbers and stuff like that, birth certificates. They didn't have that over there at this time. You could have a baby, and even though it was birthed in the hospital, it would not be recorded. So Caroline hesitated for a minute because, like I said, 3,000 kroner was a year of her wages. She couldn't afford that. Dagmar quickly interrupted, "Don't worry about it. The adoptees will pay the fee. Just give me the baby." She slams the door. Now, Caroline, and this isn't the first time this happened. Dagmar has been, this is the 20th or 30th, 40th maybe baby that she's done this to. She would get the baby that you don't want because you can't afford it, and she'll adopt it out to a family who does want it, and that's how she would make her money, because you would pay her to find a family and this, that, and the other. However, the thing is, most mothers who came up and responded to her ad and paid her the money and gave her the baby, they didn't follow back up. It was a one knock thing. Knock, knock, knock. "Hey, how are you? I'm good. I'm about to be better. Here's the baby. Here's the money." This, that, and the other. She never expected this 22-year-old domestic servant, Caroline, to knock twice on her door. She didn't expect Caroline to go home and her maternal instinct, her maternal, protective mothering. She goes home in her apartment, her little apartment, and she doesn't feel whole anymore. She knows she did something wrong. She gave her baby away, and that's a part of her. It came out of her. I know the man doesn't want it, told her to get rid of it, but that's her. And she immediately started feeling this remorse and this disgust with herself and this regret. And Dagmar never expected her to come back, because no one ever does. Wolfie says, "Are they eating the babies? Is this the vampire Sacramento shit?" No, but I will tell you, I found something on this case specifically that I am sure no one else has talked about. If anyone else has done this case, which I doubt it, the reason I'm doing this case is because it came up in my RSS feed. In Denmark, it's popular, obviously, but it just became a documentary that's actually really popular over there. And it's got a really creepy name, too. It's called The Girl with the Needle. And the picture of it is basically like in a park, and there's this like girl standing over a baby carriage looking down into the baby carriage. It is super effing creepy. But I found something about this story that I don't think they even, because I didn't see it anywhere else, but I pulled it from two different sources, one being the Daily Telegraph, which obviously is not really the best source to pull it from, and the other one was just a random newspaper who probably pulled it from that. But it does go into some vampire shit with this story. I don't know if it's, I'll get to it, but it's only one little thing, and it is in the effing paper from the 1920s. So at this point, Caroline gives the baby, she kisses the forehead of the baby, and she leaves. Fast forward September 1st, 1920, up the same stairs, the creaking stairs. Her hands are trembling. This is Caroline. She has been without her baby. It's a part of her. It's like losing a part of yourself. She knows that she has done this, and hopefully she'll get back up to the apartment, and I haven't found a buyer yet. Here you go. You can take your baby back. It's fine. That's the best case scenario. She can figure out all this stuff later, like how to take care of it or whatever. Opening the door, Dagmar, same as before, but this time she has a disgusted look on her face, and she immediately shuts the door. She's wearing an apron. It is covered in soot. Her face is covered in soot. She can smell this burnt, sugary molasses sort of tinge in the air. It's almost citrusy. And she is just like, "What do you want? What are you doing here? Why are you back here?" She is crumpling this newspaper, which she puts this ad in, and she is just, her hands are tightening, and she is just upset. Why are you here? She's blocking the doorway, and that's when Caroline, the mother, 22-year-old, who just gave her baby up not even 24 hours ago, says, "Let me see her one last time. Let me see Gerda one last time, please." She was most most likely going to try to convince her to take the baby back. That's why she's there. But let me see her one last time to make sure she's safe. Let me kiss her. And then even if she got the baby and ran, maybe she would do that. At this point, the housewoman, Dagmar, blocks the door. She's very rude and she's very stern. The family moved to Sweden. I don't have their address. She is saying she's already adopted out this baby, Gerda, she had just received. And now this family has already moved to Sweden. She doesn't have the address anymore. Caroline could hear this faint crying upstairs. I don't know how I don't do babies. I do puppies. I don't know how babies cry. I don't know. Fuck. She's hearing this faint wail upstairs. Wah, wah. Dagmar immediately interrupts that sound. It's just the cats. Bam, slams the door. Now, when Caroline looked in, because she could see past Dagmar a little bit, she saw something. Now, this is a real photo of inside the apartment. I'll show you the apartment, but this is an actual photo taken. And these were kind of common, right? I mean, I don't want to say this was unusual, but this was the cause of the soot right here. This is a masonry stove, and it's pretty large, and it was used very recently. In fact, if you look in there, you could definitely probably see some bones. Oh, I just gave the story away, I think. So this is this is creepy. Look at this. Look at this little like creepy ass figure or whatever. So this would be like, I'm guessing this is the main door right here. And as soon as Dagmar opened the door, Caroline could see the stove and she knew something was wrong, but she immediately, the door was slammed. You see like a detective hat here. Obviously something was going on in this apartment. At this point, Caroline leaves and she's on the stairs. She collapses. She starts clawing at her dress because she knows what is happening. She knows. I mean, that maternal instinct is like when a mother can pick out her babies crying over 100 different babies. It's like a part of her. And she would say later, quote, "I smell her in my hair, that sweet, smoky stink." She knows her daughter is in that oven. This is Dagmar right here. This is the woman who we're talking about tonight. She's the woman who took the baby. She's the woman who's taken many babies. She's admitted publicly to disposing of 13 of these babies. So her whole business model is to put an ad in the Social Demokraten, which is like a German newspaper over there. It basically says, if you need someone to adopt out your baby, bring her to me, and she would dispose of the baby, but she would say that she's actually finding an adopted family for it. And that's pretty terrible. She's got a couple names, but the one that I find extremely interesting is out of all the names, she's like the monster of this, that, and the other. But the one that really brings it home, she's known as the Angel Maker, right? I mean, that's pretty powerful, the Angel Maker. But this is terrible. It's a terrible story. Obviously, she's evil, but I wanted to kind of humanize her. I mean, there's her mugshot you just saw. But is this, I don't want to say, is this not her fault, but is this more of the system that failed her? Is she completely to blame for this? So let's kind of go over her background real quick, and not to say that she's off the hook, but, given the system at the time, there was no social welfare system, especially if you got pregnant and you weren't married, you're an unwed mother. You had not only no support financially, but you were stigmatized. You were ostracized. You were spit at. You were a whore. You were a filthy slut. Even though, I mean, for Caroline, 22-year-old domestic servant, it was her employer, the man of the house, who has a wife. And do you think it was Caroline's fault, or did the man throw himself on her? Let's be honest. It most likely started with him fantasizing about her, and then he throws himself on her, and possibly, we don't know because Caroline's lost a history. She testified this, that, and the other, and then she's forever forgotten, but she could have been raped. She could have been groomed. I mean, she's young. She's 22. The man in the house is 40, 50, you know? I mean, she could have been raped. She could have been groomed. She could have been fed some bullshit lies. I mean, the wife is right there, you know? And now it's her problem. And not only is it her problem, but the whole system is there to call her a whore and make her feel like a dirty piece of trash. And it's not like that today, obviously. You know, we have the social system that, you know, helps. You're not just going to have a baby, unwed mother, and not have any food to eat, in America at least. Let's talk about Dagmar. She's obviously a lot older than Caroline and all the other mothers that came to her. Her father, day laborer, her mother was scrubbing floors. They were very poor, just like everyone else. They survived on potato pills and desperation. A couple of things that mark her childhood that I think are important. There were 7 kids in the house. 5 siblings died, and she was the weakest one, but she's miraculously survived. They died of diphtheria. Her grandfather sexually abused her every night growing up. Every night growing up. And this would all come out in court when she testifies, because she was eventually caught. Caroline, the reason we're doing her specifically is because she is the girl that knocked twice. She's the girl that went back. She's the one with that mother's guilt, that remorse for giving her baby up. She is the one out of 40 or 50, no one really knows. 13 is what she was convicted for. But she is the one who actually had that remorse and went back and knocked twice. And then she goes to the police. Dagmar, all this comes out in court because this was one of the first times that a psychiatrist gets involved, because they want to know why this woman killed 40 or 50 babies. What is wrong with her? She's a woman. She should have this natural protective feeling for babies, not kill them. She was sexually abused by her grandfather every night. She finally goes to her parents and says, "Granddaddy's touching me. He's you know, this, that, and the other." What do? They beat her. They punish her for lying. So she has a very bad childhood. The whole family is poor. At 13 years old, she's arrested for stealing bread out of the local market to feed her family. She was born into a life of sexual molestation and poverty, and out comes a monster, right? At 23, she gives birth to her first child, Axel, who dies months later, and they said it was just natural baby, like SIDS or whatever it is. However, they did put in the report that she had a blue face, or the baby did have a blue face, and later it came out that that baby was probably strangled. A litany of men had married her and got her pregnant. This, that, and the other. Fast forward. Let's fast forward through all that. Her life, her childhood was absolutely terrible. Now, let's talk about the system. In post-World War I Denmark, monetary inflation was 300%. Money meant nothing and no one had it. Okay, especially an unwed mother. Unwed mothers made up 40% of the female workforce. Not only that, if you got pregnant and you were not married, you'd be fired. You would possibly be in jail. They could jail you for that. And the law offered no help. Also, the system, as I said, no birth certificates for any of these babies. None whatsoever. No numbers. None were registered. This case changed that. After this case, they were like, okay, maybe we should look into this and revamp the system. They changed it after this case and started doing birth certificates. There was no oversight for private adoptions and stuff like this. That's how you could have a regular woman putting in ads in the local newspaper and offering to take your baby and adopt him out. Her ads, which was in the Social Democrat, said the following: "Loving home sought for newborn, discretion assured." Now, this apparently is one of the ads. This is apparently from what, now all these sources are not in English. I can't read that, but this is kind of cool because it's an old timey, ad that she would put in there. We know her first murder, April 15th, 1916. So about 4 years before, and think about it. This is her full-time job. So 1916 in April, which was 4 years before Caroline approached her in July 1920. That is 4 years of her doing this, maybe once or twice a month. I mean, so it's a lot of babies. The first murder, Rasmine Jensen handed her baby over her 3-week-old son, Harry. Dagmar strangled him with an umbilical cord and threw him in the cemetery. There was a local cemetery by. She dumped his body in a latrine there. Now, she never got caught for this because no one would know. These babies aren't registered, and who would know that? Then Dagmar's boyfriend/husband, or the guy that was with her at the time, pawned the baby's stroller for an additional 20 kroner. The stove that you saw in the apartment, this is the stove that Caroline's baby Gerda ended up in. But there was a forensic report done on this case, and the stove set there, this cast iron belly, had temperatures of what would be temperatures of 600 degrees Celsius, which is hot enough to reduce bone to brittle fragments within hours. The contents inside that stove that I showed you, and let me go back for a second. I mean, this stove right here, this is the actual photo, all right? And I'm guessing whatever's in here. So this is a police photo, right? This is the actual stove that was in the apartment. The police photo, they take the photo probably without going through here at the time. So look at the bottom. You see stuff in the bottom of this stove. We can all see that. Well, from the forensic reports of the apartment, we know that that stove contained 9 sets of infant remains intermingled with coal. So nine different babies were found, their remains. Now, remember, their bones were reduced to brittle fragments, but 9 different sets of bones from different babies were found in the stove. There were also scrape patterns inside of the stove. So someone scraped out, the earlier contents of the stove. Caroline goes to the police, obviously, and the police go through all this, and then they search the place. They find the stove, and then they find a ledger. In the ledger were names of all the recent people who gave their child up. Now, this was big news. Also, keep in mind, this was the case of the century. This was it. So imagine being one of those 40 or 50 mothers who just gave your baby up for adoption, thinking that they're with a loving family right now. Thinking of them with a loving family. Imagine them when this comes out. Not only that, imagine the newspapers putting the ledgers out with your name in it. Wolfie says, let's say 10 babies a month for 12 months for 4 years. That's 480 babies. I don't know, man. Maybe. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure she had months where she did too, I mean, she was in the paper advertising this. Who knows, man? Who knows? But eventually she started doing a ledger, and a lot of them in the ledger, it wasn't the same amount every time. For instance, and this is weird. This is what we're going to talk about. Remember I said Caroline, when she gave Gerda up, she didn't have the 3,000 kroner. And then Dagmar, I had to search this multiple times to verify this, but Dagmar said, don't worry about it. So she didn't pay a dime, which is going to bring me to something else here in a second, which is what you were talking about earlier. But Marta Jensen, 200 kroner. So that's not a lot, 200 kroner. Eric Sorensen, mother paid double for silence. Imagine, and this is her ledger. Imagine, and this came out in the newspapers. In the newspapers, it says Eric Sorensen, mother paid double for silence. Holy shit. Each note in this ledger was signed, and there was a thumbprint, a very small thumbprint in dried blood. Take that how you want. I have no effing idea why she would do that, but there were very small thumbprints from the babies in dried blood. The more I think about this case, the more effed up it gets. And this is going to go into what I'm talking about in a minute, because why were they bloody to begin begin with. She was apparently, her MO was just to strangle him with like an apron cord or some kind of cord, literature or whatever, umbilical cord. Why was there baby's blood on the thumbprint anyway? We'll get to. Neighbors constantly complained about a, quote, sickly sweet stench. Dagmar told them that she was caramelizing sugar. The stove was actually on when police busted in there, and from one paper, it was quote, glowed faintly, casting hellish shadows across a stack of infant clothes, tiny bonnets, a knitted booty, a lace trim gown speckled with brown stains. Caroline, the mother who gave away Gerda, led police there. When she got there, she was very vocal. Where is she? She screamed at Dagmar. Where is she? Dagmar at this point knows she's busted. The police are in her home. The stove is lit. It is smelling. Dagmar looked straight at Caroline and gave her a curdled smile. Just a kind of, you know where he's at. She had tried to mask the smell with multiple things. Vanilla extract, which she used to mask this metallic tang of blood. She would put out, aromas, lemon slices, stuff like that to try to get rid of that smell. But I mean, you're talking about burnt flesh in an apartment. So officers found Gerda's remains in the stove. And the paper says it was a skull fragment the size of a walnut. In the attic, there were, quote, decomposing infants wrapped in a newspaper, a German newspaper called the Berlingske Tidende. And then there was the ledger. There were decomposing infants. Caroline wrote in her diary, I smell her in my hair, that sweet smoky stink. When I close my eyes, I see Gerda's skull grinning from the ashes. I paid for this. My kroner bought the coal that burned her. Police actually did an interview with the officer that was in charge of the raid. And this is interesting because the raid happened in 1920 and the police officer was interviewed in 2009. So, I mean, he was old man when he was interviewed, but they were doing another documentary. They'd done a few documentaries on this case, but they interviewed him and then he recalled this, quote, the stove's ashes held fragments, ribs no thicker than matchsticks. Dagmar claimed they were chicken bones, but chickens don't wear lace. That's what he said. I really wanted to know what happened to Caroline. Caroline was lost to history, but what I did find is a neighbor who was interviewed said, basically, I don't think they had the word for this back then, but Caroline had postpartum depression, societal shame, and the neighbor actually said that she would spend all day raking her fingernails against the outside of the apartment, the brick, the side of the apartment, like round back where it's brick. She would just rake her fingernails till they just bled, and it was just blood streaks on the wall. So she basically went downhill pretty effing quick. So what happened to this? This was a huge spectacle in the courtroom, March 1921. The courtroom was outraged when the prosecutors got up and they didn't say much, but they just had those little walnuts, those little tiny skulls that came out of that furnace, the ones that haven't became all brittled yet, those tiny walnut skulls. The mothers in that courtroom started wailing. Her defense lawyer, Carl Willey, argued that, quote, and we talked about this with Society at the time, quote, we created this monster. She is a child of your neglect. I know we didn't get too deep into her personal history or whatever, but it was big at the time because it's not, why did you kill? It's, why are you a mother? Why are you a woman? How as a woman could you do this to babies? How is it? Was it money? Because like even greed, I don't think it was greed. Like some of these, like for instance, Caroline, you took her baby for free. You weren't getting paid for it. Why? Why do that? She was going to be the first female executed since 1861 in Denmark. Death by axe. That is pretty bad. But the king commuted it to life sentence, declaring that, quote, "we do not kill women." She actually died at 42, and guards reported her final words is super weird final words. Her final words before she died were, "Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I'm not." This is the reforms that came from this case. The Child Welfare Act came directly from this case. 1923, which was state-regulated foster care. In 1924, the Mother's Aid, financial support for single mothers. So the case actually improved society for unwed mothers, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, that is a pretty effing bad case. Let me show you something I found, but this is from the Daily Telegraph in London, Friday, September 17th, 1920. And this is the only time I've seen this, but I definitely want to throw it out there. This is from the Daily Telegraph in 1920. A female ogre foster mother's crime, from our own correspondent, Copenhagen, Thursday. Some days ago, the police here arrested a Mrs. Overbye, a foster mother who was suspected of infanticide. After a long examination, confessed that she had killed not one but 11 children in the beginning from motives of cupidity. She obtained large sums of money from the children's parents, but later on she took great pleasure in killing the children and drinking their blood. You see it right there. Okay. The court is sure that she killed a larger number still. I don't know. I couldn't find anything else in translated newspapers or archives, anything else about drinking of the blood. But I will say what's interesting here is, number one, she didn't take money from Caroline. Okay. So she had no financial reason to kill that baby. Number two, she would sign the ledgers with small thumbprints. Obviously, each baby, supposedly it was their baby's blood, right? They didn't have DNA testing back then, but she'd make the babies bleed, and then on their thumb, she'd do a little thumbprint on the ledger. Okay, the baby's bleeding. That's two reasons right there where it makes me really suspicious if there was anything else going on, especially not taking the money. And obviously, we'll never know, but was she drinking the blood? I mean, it's not like she confessed to it, but it's not like they had any evidence either, because all the babies were burned. Anyway, thanks for being here, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed. And yeah, I miss you guys. And I'll see you later this week for another one. All right, bye.
Kind of running this shit.